I'm on the road from Dublin to Cork. Cork is where I grew up, and then after college I moved to Dublin. And I'm conscious that from the statistics, actually half of the people who watch this channel are from America. So trying to keep it fairly global and not too parochial. But Cork is in the south of Ireland, and Dublin is the capital city and the largest city in Ireland. Cork is in the south, and it's the third largest city in Ireland. And that's where I grew up, and then I moved to Dublin, the capital city, then when I was after college. And that's a pretty universal story, I suppose, especially across America and other places where you grow up, you go to school in your local town, and then invariably you tend to move on, well, quite often for college or afterwards then for work. So I think it's probably a universal feeling, and I suppose the reason I wanted thoughts I wanted to explore were that nostalgia of returning to where you grew up. And I'm on my way now, I'm on the road, and every time since I've left where I grew up, every time when I'm returning, there is a wave of nostalgia that comes over me. And well, I think quite a bit anyway. I think quite a lot, probably too much. But I start to think about, well, it's more not necessarily very cognitive thinking, it's just feelings, really, actually. Now that I think about it, it's feelings start to come back. And I suppose it could be generally wrapped up and described as nostalgia. For it's like a different life, really. And even though, I mean, in international terms, Ireland is a tiny country, so the distance between Dublin and Cork is 250 kilometres. Now, it used to be a nightmare journey in the old days. It could take 6 hours, which made it seem much further away. Excuse me. Now, it's possible to do it in probably 3 hours. But there is that feeling of nostalgia when I'm on this road, going to back where I grew up, and there's good memories but also bad memories. I suppose bittersweet is probably the best way to put it. There's good and bad memories that come back, and it is a bit like a half-life that I had and that stopped when I left there and a new life started when I moved. On the whole, I'm definitely no regrets about leaving and moving to Dublin, because I think it's an essential thing to do, really, to move and find some new environment and to rediscover yourself. Because in many ways, a lot of the things that I do now, like music and this channel and stuff like that, I don't think I would be doing it if I had stayed in Cork and the place I grew up. I wouldn't. And it could have been possible that I would have stayed there, and I don't envy that version of me that would have stayed behind. And I think one of the reasons, and again I'd say this is universal, is that when you grow up and you go to primary school and secondary school in a place, you are put in a box, and your character is kind of defined by people and largely by yourself. And you find yourself playing a role throughout your childhood and through your teens and then into adulthood. And if you were to change very radically, that must be quite a disruption, because people around you become comfortable with who you are and your life choices and stuff like that. And I'm not talking anything too dramatic, but I mean, for some people it could be very dramatic, but you know, they could maybe change religion or become a drug addict or become very successful. But I'm just talking about probably the thing that affects everybody is just small changes or growth, really, where you're trying to be a better person or trying to be more successful, trying to be better. Sometimes there can be a little bit of resentment if you break out if you're in that cozy shell of an environment where people know you for as you grew up as this type of guy, and then suddenly you try to break out beyond that and be something different or better. And the wonderful thing about moving to a new city for me was I was able to totally redefine myself. And that sounds like a very grandiose thing, but it was really refreshing, because I went to a place where I knew absolutely nobody, and it's kind of hard to believe in that the cities are quite close together, as I say, 250 kilometres, but in many ways, spiritually, they are like light years away. And there's it's just Cork, certainly being kind of the third city, was very parochial and cliquish, some would say, which is with some truth. Everybody knew everybody, which I think is a good thing in some ways, and I'll talk about that later. But then it can be a bad thing in other ways. But so being able to move to some place where nobody knew me was refreshing, and I wasn't even really conscious of it, but I was able to just start again. And when you were 21, I think I was at the time, and you're starting again, it's a way of shedding a lot of the annoying aspects of yourself, maybe, that held you back, that you kind of didn't like to be labelled with, and you might have been when you were younger. And certainly school can be, and again I'd say this is fairly universal, no matter where you go to secondary school through your teens, and certainly for me it was, but going to an all-boys school especially, you definitely become boxed into a kind of stereotype, whether you're the studious one or the athletic one or a musician or, you know, the popular cool person or otherwise. And that can be very limiting, and that carries with you. And really, I suppose we all have to bear responsibility for redefining ourselves. You know, I think you can't say, okay, this is the way I was treated at school, and now this is the way I am for the rest of my life. No matter where you are, you have to decide what's best for you. And but it was refreshing being able to come to a new place and decide and meet people as a blank slate. And in many ways, I was much more confident in my 20s, starting anew, and I was much more confident. I was probably happier. I was and a lot more adventurous and artistic and creative, and that's when I started all of this. You know, started to get into music and film and making some films and this kind of, well, this came a lot later, but that creativity I was able to explore with a lot less inhibition, I suppose. And again, I have to take responsibility for this, but when I was living in Cork, I would have, the idea of kind of becoming, of the idea of telling your friends I'm now a YouTuber, for instance, would be a culture shock. Let's just put it that way. And I mean, even now it's kind of a cringy kind of thing, or culture shock kind of thing to say to even to myself. But I mean, I love it. I love doing this kind of thing, regardless of the metrics. And people always assume it's all about the metrics and the views and all that kind of thing. But just the whole process of doing this, for me, is very rewarding. I just love it. It's a form of self-therapy, really. Talking to myself through a car journey while I'm alone. So I really enjoy this kind of thing, but I would never have done it, really, I suppose, when I was that other person in Cork growing up in school. And it can be kind of hard to break out of that niche when you are stuck in it, because I think we all gravitate towards comfort, and you gravitate towards a point where you're not disrupting a status quo. And even though it mightn't be said explicitly, a status quo and roles evolve in a group of friends and colleagues and stuff like that, and you find yourself unconsciously playing along to that, I think. So moving to Dublin was fantastic. Unfortunately, the time when I moved, the time previous was horrific for me, and I've talked about this in the previous video. Both my parents died in college, and when I emerged from that, it was probably the toughest time of my life. It was the best and the worst of times, because it was just a huge amount of mental torture and torment and anguish, really. But then coming out of that, I was starting a new life, really, in a way. So, I mean, that's one of the reasons why returning to Cork is quite often, and in the early days it was almost traumatizing for me to come back to visit, because the memories and just the unanswered questions in my head were driving me nuts. Now I'm a lot more calm about it, but I'm still quite nostalgic, and I tend to fall into the trap of nostalgia quite a bit. Trap of nostalgia, but that implies that it's an entirely negative thing. I think nostalgia can be a pleasant thing sometimes. But I think certainly at this stage of my life, I don't look back anymore at all, really, which is great. And that kind of reminds me of a certain amount of growth on my behalf. That sounds very self-congratulatory, but I think I will give a pat on my back for that, because in my 20s I was looking back all the time, and for a reason, because I was very screwed up, very unstable, and I was suffering absolutely really tough time. But now I don't look back at all, which I'm glad about, because it is an absolute, complete and utter waste of time and energy. And now I'm focused with the only thing that I can change, which is the future, the present and the future, and that's the only thing you can have any influence on. And time spent musing on the past is the biggest waste of time you possibly could. Especially when I've got the future in my hands now. My daughter, who is so amazing, and literally you're kind of seeing the future playing out in front of you, and that is just so heartwarming. I think that more than anything else, when you see a child, the future playing out in the shape of your own child, it shows you how utterly worthless the past is. And that's something I find a little bit surprising with some people, where they might have a child or a grandchild, and they're focusing a bit too much on the past. It might necessarily be in a negative way, but I sometimes kind of wonder why you're delving into something that happened 100 years ago when there's something amazing happening right in front of you. That can be a little bit frustrating sometimes. But I'm on my way to West Cork, to Skull, which is a beautiful little town there, seaside town, West Cork, for a film festival. I'm really looking forward to seeing it. Now, it's 5:30 p.m, and it just shows how life has changed for me, because a lot of the people have been down at this film festival since Wednesday and are going for 5 days, and I'm probably going to manage about 3 hours of it in reality, because I'll get there around 8 maybe, and then have to go. So it shows how priorities change, really, I suppose, because, and part of the reason for the delay is that my daughter is doing her exams, and I spent this morning helping her with that, but that was so satisfying, really, because she is doing so well, and that makes it all worthwhile. Probably the best job I've ever had is being a parent. Nothing more satisfying than it. So that is worth the sacrifice. So I'm going to get down, but then I'm still coming, and I suppose that's an attitude that I take, that I suppose you could look at it, or I could look at it, that it is quite an arduous journey. 8 hours, 4 hours down and 4 hours back, just to kind of be there for a few hours. But I'm thinking more and more, life is short, and it's worthwhile experiencing these kind of things, I think. Because this particular film festival I've been looking to go for a few years, and now increasingly as well. As I get older, I get the attitude that why postpone things and say, look, I'll go to that next year. If it takes a little bit of effort and it's worthwhile, I'll just do it. And I think usually these things are worthwhile. I just love the warmth of the community at these things, and the people and creative people and stuff like that. It's just always worthwhile doing. So West Cork is where my mother was born, in Balladie, which is about a few miles from Skull. And I was raised really on, when I was a child, about 2, 3, 4 years of age, when she was putting me to bed, she would always tell me stories of, it wasn't stories out of a book, it was stories from her time in that village growing up. And it's kind of interesting to think of it now, because these weren't stories out of a book. In a way, what she was doing was a kind of an ancient Irish tradition of Béalladis and passing on stories, very simple stories from parent to child. You know, these didn't come out of a book, they weren't fiction. It was real ordinary life. And Kavanagh talks about ordinary plenty. You know, we've tested and tasted too much lover, to a chink too wide comes in no wonder. And I love that poem. It's about like ordinary plenty, whereby there's such beauty in the normal, ordinary, simple things of life. And I was fascinated with these stories because, and that was a large part of my formation as a person. And I suppose the core themes of those stories were about community, about people growing up, helping each other, supporting each other, about a very close-knit community fighting against the odds. And, you know, they weren't presented, she never presented them as that didactic kind of story, you know, this is what we were like. That was the conclusion that I came from it. And I mean, it wasn't all sweetness and light. There were real stories about, and very just simple stuff about the fact that there was only one car in the village at the time. It was kind of World War II, and it was rationing. One single car in the village. The bus, you would take a bus to the nearest city, which was Cork City, and that would take probably half a day. And the bus driver would stop in every town to let people on and off, and he'd have a pint in every pub on the stops on the way. And by the time he'd get to the end, he would be. But of course, he was cautious in that he drove extra slow on the way. You know, as he got towards the end, and he probably had his 6th or 7th pint. Very different times. But West Cork used to have that very close-knit kind of community. Yeah, it has changed radically now over the last 10 years, and a lot of that sadly has been lost. But you know, it's something that's there in the memory really of growing up. There's an Irish expression: "Is Ská Chéile Bharan na Naoine." So it's about people relying on each other and helping each other through life. And really, I suppose that comes out really through necessity. Two people who are just too poor not to. And really, if people become wealthier, they rely on each other a lot less and probably don't care about each other or about community as a result. So it's not necessarily that people are doing it altruistically, maybe. There's a whole debate about that, but it's a necessity really, I suppose. You know, people were subsistence farmers, certainly in West Cork. The land there is not great and would have survived on fishing. But my mother had a shop in the village, and it was across the road from Levis's pub, and it became a restaurant then, and they sold it, and it's now a cafe. So it's lovely to go back there. West Cork's an absolutely fabulous place, and it does fill me with nostalgia. And I suppose nostalgia, you do have to be careful, because there can be a tendency to over glamorise things and to say that things were much better in the old days when perhaps they weren't. But I suppose there's also a risk of going the other direction and maybe imagining things were too awful as well. And a happy medium, I suppose, is what needs to be struck there. But West Cork is a lovely place, and I spent a lot of time in my childhood and my youth going down there. I used to go camping with friends of mine in Ilon Clara, which is Cape Clear Island off the coast of Schull. We used to get a boat out from Schull or Baltimore from it, and we used to hitchhike from Cork City all along the coast of West Cork on days like today, really, really sunny days. And it's kind of, that's where nostalgia kicks in. That seems like really good times, just hitchhiking along the road to West Cork, which makes me know that road absolutely intimately backwards nowadays. And it's another aspect which you probably never do these days. Hitchhiking is probably something that's gone out entirely, although I did give a lift to people in Kerry a few years ago. That was probably the last time I remember seeing people hitchhiking. But that was such fun, and I mean, one of the aspects of it is the only people who pick you up really are utter lunatics. So we did encounter some lunatics on the road, and it doesn't tend to be conventional people that will give you a random lift when you're pumming your way to an island in West Cork. And I used to love that. We would bypass the official campsite in the Cape Clear Island, and we would throw our tent on the top of a hill on the island, and that was really living it as raw as possible, because the elements there was probably the most exposed place you could find in Ireland, because gale force winds would come in off the Atlantic and we would be battered by the elements, and that was kind of all part of the fun. It's interesting when you're that age, you can actually find it enjoyable getting soaked wet in your own tent and then still go out and have a few pints. Probably wouldn't be able to put up with that these days. So yeah, I mean, looking back, and I suppose in terms of the next 100 years or so, my group of people is probably, I was going to say cohort, but I absolutely cringe when I hear people say that term nowadays. It's so overused. But it's probably, my group of people are probably unique in that we've lived both sides of the internet. So I grew up before the internet arrived, and now I'm living in the time when the internet is dominating. And so pre-internet, that was my youth, was before the internet. And there's no point in me saying, oh, it was a wonderful time which the internet came along and destroyed everything, because we had such a wholesome time living. Certainly no point in coming out with nonsense like that. I suppose the one aspect of it was that it definitely, I think there was definitely a lot more emphasis on actually doing things than sitting at home watching other people do stuff, which is the saddest part of modern life, really, I suppose. And I'm as guilty about it as anybody, vicariously living your life through somebody else who's doing it on the internet or social media. That is becoming a sad fact of modern life. And I mean, sad, look, like anything, if you do it in moderation, then it's not going to destroy you. But I mean, sometimes, I was thinking about it the other day, and I wondered, and it's probably a whole separate video, but I wonder, would I have benefited if I had had social media growing up? Because the one thing, and it struck me recently, the one thing that affected me most when I was growing up was loneliness. And I'm only thinking about that now, but I was incredibly lonely growing up, and it's kind of sad thinking of it now, but not too sad, in that has gone away to an extent, not fully, because I think the loneliness was so intense during my younger years that it's still actually with me now in a weird way, even if I'm surrounded by people, and I'm very lucky to be surrounded by such great people. But it was incredibly intense when I was younger, possibly because growing up was I felt quite alone, and really trying to battle for myself with family problems and all that kind of stuff, and I really didn't feel that support was there, and as a result it left me with a massive vacuous feeling of loneliness. And even though I had amazing friends, absolutely wonderful friends, a great group of friends who I love and I'm still friends with to this day, thankfully, that didn't fill the hole, and it was awful. And that was the overriding feeling that I brought with me through my teenage years. Maybe everybody has a certain amount of them, I suppose you couldn't call it teenage angst. No, it's different. It was a hole in me of loneliness and feeling that I was alone and battling things all by myself. And who knows whether that was justified or not. doesn't matter. I don't look back that much anymore. So, but it is interesting because I was reminded of it recently. But I wondered, would social media have given me a feeling, a little bit of a feeling of connection, albeit, however contrived that might have been, I think it might have given me an outlet, because I had so little other. I mean, I was crying out probably for connection, and outlet that I think it would have helped me. And I think a certain amount of it, a happy medium of having these things at your disposal is always a good thing. So, I mean, the problem is that due to its addictive nature, the dopamine rush of that bing, 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 it's just dopamine, shots to the head, and that's where it goes overboard and it becomes a corrosive thing. But it was pre-internet, and there were definitely benefits to that, because you had to go out and meet people in order to find out what they were up to. It's a pretty basic thing now, but now people who they rarely even meet, they know the intimate details of their lives and all the stuff that they're doing. Now, again, not necessarily a bad thing, if it's used in the right way. But back in those days, we would meet up as a group. It was your typical male gang, really. And there were girls there as well later, kind of after fifth year and final year of school. Girls arrived, which was great. That was a great addition. They were lovely, and I think they were a good influence on us in that we were probably fairly mature until that, and they were just really warm people to be around. And some of them would have been girlfriends. I was going out with a girl from the local school at the time when I was in school, and my friends would have been going out with people from that school as well, and that's how we would have had a kind of a mutual group. And it's kind of nice to think back on that group now. And I suppose the sad fact is that I'm in touch with nearly all of the guys from that time, which is a really close-knit group, which I, please God, will have for forever. But the girls, we are no longer in touch with, really, any of them, which is strange. I'm just realising that now, from that local school, because I mean they were real fun to be around, great bonds, great friendship. And now it was always a little bit complicated by the fact that, I suppose, that teenage life where some of us are going out with them, and there would have been breakups and a little bit of tension maybe as a result, but not a huge amount actually. I'd say it would be much worse now because of social media. That would be one definitely disadvantage of it, because things perpetuate a lot more and they're magnified. But I suppose that dynamic would have made things a little bit more difficult. But I certainly, and that's the first time I'm thinking about them now, there would have been about 10 of those girls that we hung out with who were all lovely, and we are not in touch with any of them. And I'm wondering, did any of us marry any of them? I don't think so. I don't think anybody in the group did, which is interesting. That one of us didn't marry the childhood sweetheart kind of thing. Yeah, because one friend of mine was going out with a girl from that school for years, and they were very serious, and that, if anybody was going to end up married, it would have been those two, but that didn't work out in the end, and none of the rest of them did either. And I suppose it's probably a good thing in that, I mean, really you should experience, when you're a teenager, you should go through life and just have experiences and it's a deep thing to say, but find out who you are through non-serious kind of relationships in your teens first, and screw up a little bit and learn from it, and maybe people give you a few home truths. You're going to be immature at that age, so it mightn't necessarily be a good thing. that would last for 10, 20 years into marriage, because it might be a sign that there's no growth going on there and nobody's really learning anything. But look, I mean, some people do it. I can think of a neighbour of mine who they were childhood sweethearts from school in their teens, and they're now married and they seem to get on great, which is great. So that's possible in some cases. But that is a nice thought, actually, a nice memory of those people who sadly we've lost touch with. And I must, I suppose, with the exception of one, which is interesting, and now that I think of it, it was when we went on a holiday down to Schull here that I met one of those friends who goes on holiday down to Schull. Now that I think of it, she was the only one who I've met since those days. In fact, and it's kind of real nostalgia, deep nostalgia now, but I remember we used to hang out at a place. We grew up in Bishopstown in Cork, and we hung out in a place called the Plant Place, which was kind of just, it was empty fields really, and we used to hang out there by a river. And I remember one of us saying, or one of the girls said, look, I want us all to meet back here in 20 years time. So that would have been, that would have been a long time ago. So, and it was a kind of real kind of thing out of a film script to say, but sadly never happened. But they're good memories, actually, thinking of those people and that group of friends. The lads that I grew up with are still very close friends now, and that is great, and I'm very lucky to have them. But yeah, that was pre-internet times. And also, one of the things I notice about these days, well, look, one reality about modern life, I mean, back then in Irish society, the reality was there were two places people met. You met on Sunday morning at Mass. Most people went to Mass in those days, the vast majority, probably even 90% where I was growing up. And then people met in the pub. So you had told those two great institutions were where a community gathered. And now it's 2022, and really the Catholic Church in Ireland has been really bulldozed for, I suppose they went through so many scandals that there were so many corrupt people there that ruined it really and caused an awful lot of pain. And on top of that, I suppose there was Ireland has become a secular society really. There's been a vengeance really against the church trying to drive it out. But look, that's a whole separate debate. But the one, whether you were religious or not, or whatever your feelings about the church, the one thing about it was that Sunday morning was the 1 hour in a week when the entire community came together in one room. And that was a wonderful thing. And that is now been gutted from society. There is no replacement for that. It would be nice if there was, but the reality is there isn't. So society has, for better or for worse, well, I mean, it can be for better, but whatever about the reasons, society has become atomized as a result. There is no 1 hour in a week where people come together for any reason. And that is a gap, I think, in society. And the pub was the other one. And now the C19 thing that went on for 2 years has almost wiped out pubs in Ireland, the whole culture of pubs in Ireland. And it's, it's interesting because I don't drink due to alcoholism in my family. I've decided not to drink now. I drink tiny amounts, or you've seen probably Guinness Zero videos that I've done reviews on this channel. So I don't drink alcohol, but I love the Irish pub, and it's been a huge part of my life. It's the place where I feel most relaxed, and I get so much enjoyment and connection with people. And that was the Irish pub, and I'm talking about it now in the past tense, which is a little bit sad because it is in the past tense. The Irish pub, really, as we knew it, was a wonderful place. Now, some awful negativity came out of it too, in the alcoholism and broken families and the effect that had. that was more the alcohol really, or the attitude that people had really though, rather than the pub, because people are still drinking probably the same or more. But the Irish pub was probably one of the few places in the world where you can go in not knowing anybody or not knowing many people, and then coming out having made friends and connected with people. And it's due to a simple thing really, in that it's a simple structural issue. Not to be too analytic about it, but well, I am being. But if you go to anywhere else in the world, say Italy, certainly around the Mediterranean, you go in, you are guided to a table and you're told, here you go, you sit down and you stay there for however long. If you're there for 5 hours, you are at that table, and it's a fixed, rigid structure. Whereas the Irish pub was one place where you roamed around and sat down wherever you want, or you didn't at all, you just stood and you mingled. And that simple lack of structure from a sociological point of view, must have had such a massive influence on Irish society in comparison to other societies which had that rigidity where how do people meet each other in Italy? I mean, when you are guided to a table, how do you mingle with other people, make friends, or meet your future wife, or whatever? I don't know. But so that when I think back and I have the nostalgia, the Irish pub is a big part of that, and the C19 thing, it's the conspiracy theorists would say that this is part of it, but it brought in that thing where you had to book a table, you had to be assigned a table, you'd stay a million miles away from the nearest person, all this kind of rule-based obsession. That pretty much wiped that out, and I doubt it'll ever come back, which is a sad thing. But yeah, so that's two aspects of Irish society. That fact that we used to meet on a Sunday morning in one room, and as it turned out, it was for mass, and whatever you think about religion or mass and stuff, that has left a gap in society which will be hard to fill, which won't be filled. And it was a nice thing. I used to always meet people afterwards, and it was a real way to keep a society connected. The other aspect was kind of a simple one, and that was that you had the fact that you had TV. I mean, TV, I was going to say aspects of TV, but just TV full stop. Growing up in Ireland, we only had two channels. They were called RT1 and RT2. Or RTA, Hen and RTA, though. Fada, meaning Radio Television. But whereas now it went through the evolution of, you had a million channels, and now you have the internet, so it's streaming services where nothing is scheduled. And that gave you an anchor of discussion around society. Like for me, the week revolved around Top of the Pops, which was a show, a music show on Thursday nights at 7 o'clock. And that became a religion for me growing up from probably the age of 3, I'd say, because my brothers and sisters would watch it, and I was hooked immediately. And the week would revolve around that because my love of music was so intense. And then you'd be talking about it on Friday morning. Whereas now, there is, and again, it's kind of a bit cheesy nostalgia, but because you had structured programming, the next day you had a discussion about what was on the night before, and there was no binging or stuff like that. And now everything is available. Because everything is available, nothing is available. You can binge watch everything in one sitting and watch a year's worth of TV in one day, which is kind of a little bit sickening, the thought of it. But so I think it removes that bonding kind of structure of having particular milestones in the week where it drives discussion. There it is. I'm drowning in nostalgia, and I'm over halfway to Cork at this stage. Well, actually, not halfway. I'm nearly there. God, time has flown. So have the kilometres. It is a beautiful day. It's really sunny outside, so I'm really looking forward to getting to West Cork and spending time there. It's a very beautiful town, Schull, and it's been good to just reminisce and to engage in a bit of nostalgia about the past, which is something I don't do very often. And this has been therapeutic to dredge it all back in a good way, and to just rummage through some of the memories that I've had. So thanks for staying with me, and see you next time. So long.